Welcome, students. Let's get right into it. We're using this explainer today to break down the high-level connections between Greta Gerwig's modern film Barbie, Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House, and Euripides' ancient tragedy Medea. We'll be zeroing in on the core themes of identity, social control, and the journey toward autonomy, which is exactly what you need to focus on to secure those top marks on your Leaving Cert English comparative paper. We aren't just looking at these stories as isolated pieces of entertainment, we're treating them as profound comparative texts that show us exactly how society shapes the roles we are all expected to play.
Okay, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the comparative stage, matriarchy versus rigid patriarchy, villains and social control, relationships built on illusions, breaking free for autonomy, and finally, your final exam takeaways. Let's do this.
Section 1. The comparative stage. To kick things off, we need to nail down the precise academic vocabulary that's going to anchor your comparative essays and really show the examiner you deeply understand these texts.
So our first anchor term is matriarchal. This perfectly defines that initial, totally idealized world of Barbie land. It's a utopian society where women run literally everything: the government, healthcare, the Supreme Court, the sciences. Meanwhile, the Kens are, well, mostly ignored. They're basically treated as accessories whose only real job is beach. It's bright, it's cheerful, but as we're going to see, it's actually a highly constructed system with some very strict rules of its own.
Our second anchor term is absolutely crucial: autonomy. Autonomy represents the ultimate destination for Barbie, for Nora in A Doll's House, and for Medea. All three of these protagonists are fighting tooth and nail to break free from the little boxes society put them in. They are demanding the right to govern their own lives, even when the price tag on that independence is incredibly high. Think about stereotypical Barbie and her physically flawless, but let's face it, emotionally shallow reality. When we first meet her, she has zero true autonomy. Every single day is a perfectly choreographed routine. She doesn't have to make any tough choices because her entire path is already laid out for her. It's exactly like Nora, playing the cheerful little wife in her Norwegian home. Barbie is just living a performance, completely oblivious to the limitations of her own existence.
Moving right along to Section 2, Matriarchy versus Rigid Patriarchy. What's super fascinating here is how we can contrast the worlds these heroines actually begin their journeys in, because setting dictates everything about what a character is even allowed to do.
Take the upbeat, completely artificial matriarchy of Barbie land. It's flawless, right? But it's an illusion. Nobody actually grows or changes there. Now contrast that sharply with the dark, oppressive, male-dominated settings of A Doll's House and Medea. In 19th century Norway, Nora has literally no legal or financial independence. I mean, she has to forge her own father's signature just to get a bank loan. And over in ancient Corinth, Medea is both a foreigner and a woman, which makes her doubly powerless in that rigid hierarchy. In all three of these texts, the social setting isn't just background noise. It's an active, oppressive force dictating expectations and crushing personal freedom.
That brings us to Section 3, Villains and Social Control. The big takeaway here is understanding the forces of social control that actually trigger each protagonist's crisis. Without these controlling figures, there wouldn't be any catalyst for change.
Let's break down these villains, because control takes a very different shape in each text. Look at Torvald from A Doll's House. He uses reputation and total financial control to keep Nora completely dependent on him. He literally treats her like a child or a plaything. Then you've got Jason in Medea. His selfish male entitlement leads him to casually toss Medea aside for a better political marriage. And the crazy part is, he expects her to just quietly accept her fate. And in Barbie, we actually face a dual threat. We have Ken, who weaponizes a fragile new patriarchy to brainwash Barbie land, and the Mattel CEO, representing corporate control, who absurdly tries to force Barbie back into a literal cardboard box the second she steps out of line.
So, how does this build your comparative links? Well, specific scenes from the Barbie movie perfectly mirror the massive thematic turning points in these classic plays. Think about Barbie suddenly getting flat feet and having intrusive thoughts of death. That is the exact emotional equivalent of Nora finally realizing she's been treated like a doll her entire life. Then there's Ken returning from the real world to enforce his kingdom. That directly parallels Jason's betrayal and social climbing. Both men completely disregard the women who supported them just to seize power for themselves. And Barbie's final, super mundane trip to the gynecologist? It seems anticlimactic, but it's actually her version of Nora famously slamming the door on her way out. It's a profound, definitive step into the real world.
Section 4, Relationships Built on Illusions. This leads us right into our next comparative mode, analyzing romantic relationships that are doomed to shatter, because they are built on a total foundation of falsehoods. In both Barbie and A Doll's House, the central romances have zero true depth. Barbie and Ken have this incredibly shallow, one-sided connection where Ken literally has no identity outside of how Barbie perceives him. Talk about a fragile sense of self, right? Meanwhile, Nora and Torvald's marriage looks picture-perfect from the outside, but it's just a performance. It's built entirely on his need for control and a pristine social reputation. The second real adversity hits, like when Torvald reads Krogstad's letter, that illusion of love instantly evaporates, revealing the super ugly power imbalance underneath.
And just like the Mattel CEO views Barbie as a product to be managed and neatly packaged for public consumption, Jason in Medea views his wife as something he can easily discard. He actually believes he can trade Medea in for a younger, royal bride to secure his own future, and he fully expects her to just stay quietly in her place. These relationships fail because the men involved don't view their partners as equals. They view them as assets, things to be controlled or just dismissed the minute they're no longer convenient.
All right, Section 5. Breaking free for autonomy. Let's dive into the climax of our character arcs. This is the dramatic push for personal liberation, where these women finally stand up and say, enough.
Nora's powerful realization of her own agency, when she says, "I must stand on my own 2 feet," is just the perfect dramatic parallel to Barbie's awakening. For Barbie, this happens right after Gloria's brilliant monologue about the totally impossible, contradictory expectations placed on women. In both texts, a moment of deep emotional truth is what triggers their self-discovery. They realize they've been living inside someone else's idea of who they should be, and they finally decide to just step out into the unknown.
But how they break free is where we see the most fascinating contrast of all. Barbie and Nora find their freedom through quiet self-liberation. They literally walk away. They choose a difficult, uncertain truth over a comfortable illusion, which is a massive act of growth. Medea, on the other hand, represents the darkest possible end of the spectrum. Stripped of her rights and facing exile, she reclaims her power through absolute, terrifying destruction. Her path to autonomy is paved with revenge, and it ends in the horrific murder of her own children just to punish Jason. It is autonomy, yes, but achieved at a completely devastating and tragic cost.
And finally, Section 6, Final Exam Takeaways. Okay, let's gather up our thoughts here to make sure you are fully equipped with the insights you need for your essays. You really want to synthesize these comparisons clearly for the examiner.
Make absolutely sure you use these core takeaways to show the examiner exactly how identity is shaped, limited, and ultimately reclaimed across all 3 texts. First, highlight the shift from a highly constructed societal illusion, whether that's Barbie land or a 19th century drawing room, to a harsh personal truth. Second, contrast the specific methods the villains use to enforce social control, everything from corporate boxing to strict financial dominance. And lastly, do a deep dive into the varying emotional costs of achieving true autonomy. Contrast Barbie's hope for the future, Nora's stoic isolation, and Medea's catastrophic rage.
I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative question to debate in your study groups, or hey, maybe even use it as a thesis for your next essay. Which of these dramatic journeys out of the box makes the most compelling argument for autonomy? Is it the quiet growth, the stark independence, or the destructive revenge? Think about it. Thanks for studying with me today, and best of luck on your exams. You're going to crush it.